So, welcome to all of you who are here in person. Welcome to all of you who are tuning in later. It's wonderful to have you here another Wednesday evening class. These Wednesday evening classes have kind of become the highlight of my week. And so I'm so grateful that there's someone here to share it with me. Would be a bummer if I logged on. It was just me. I would miss you all terribly. So tonight we are talking again about this topic of aligning with the light and attending to the shadow. I'd like to start tonight by just talking a little bit more about the shadow. What do we mean when we say the shadow? What is it? You know, the shadow is kind of a Western psychology kind of a term. It's not a Sanskrit word. So let's see if we can understand what that means a little more. And to do that, I'd like you just to imagine for a moment that a rock flew through the window in the room that you're in right now with just a terrible bang and smash, and the glass shatters. And, you know, what would we do? Our bodies would react. We'd go, tense up, the breath would get shallow, adrenaline would flow, fight or flight kind of would kick in, you know? So then, even if we found out, oh, it was just, you know, our next door neighbor was mowing their lawn and it threw a rock and it's all okay and it's not a threat and it's not a problem, it would still take a while for the residue of that energy to leave the body, right? And to empty out of the emotional body and the mental body. All three of those bodies that make up the personality would get involved and be engaged in that reaction. And so it would take a little while for that to dissipate. Now, imagine, just make sure everybody is muted. Imagine that as a child, you were in a situation where traumatic things were happening all the time. And there was no support to help you kind of release the energy of that. Imagine that energy, instead of kind of being able to be dissipated, as you and I would do right now if the rock came through, we would allow that to dissipate and we'd have an understanding about it, then it would still take a little while for that energy to dissipate. Imagine that we didn't have the opportunity for that energy to dissipate and it got stuck in our system. And it was on a regular occurrence that we had these kind of traumatic or scary or hurtful or fear-inducing kinds of events. So that energy would get stuck in our system and it would begin to get woven into our sense of ourself, right? And it would operate, because we would resist and repress it, it would operate from the subconscious level, not at a conscious level. And at the subconscious level, these energies merge and compact and blend and begin to be very influential regarding how we see the world and how we interpret events and how we feel about ourselves. That energy becomes thick and blocks our own perception of the inner light, so that we don't have a sense that there's anything happening in the inner light, that we don't even have an inner light. So it negatively affects how we feel about ourselves, how we view ourselves. It strongly affects how we see the world. The world we see is largely a projection of the energies that we hold in our own system. It isn't an objective reality out there that all of us, you know, if we line 5 of us up and look out at reality, we're going to have about 5 different kind of views, perhaps different angles of perception, different opinions, and so forth, right? So the energy that we hold in ourselves, the energy that we're operating from, even unconsciously, has this very powerful effect on how we see the world, how we perceive the world, how we interpret interactions, how we interact with the world, so forth. all of this repressed energy, and the theory says it accumulates lifetime to lifetime, all of this repressed energy makes up the shadow, what we call the shadow. It's just where we push things down into, like a cellar that we don't know what else to do with. And we didn't have people supporting us and helping us. And we just learned to do whatever we need to do to survive. And largely that's an issue of resisting and repressing. And so that begins to accumulate into what we call the shadow. And it to the ego, to the conscious mind, it becomes kind of a scary place. Not because it's inherently evil or bad. It becomes a scary place because the energies in it are rather imposing. They can feel quite negative. They are uncomfortable. That's why we repress them to begin with, is because they're very uncomfortable. So to get close to them, most people don't want to do that. As soon as someone begins to look inside and they begin to sense the presence of these energies in the shadow, we kind of immediately turn back and away. We don't want to see these energies. We're afraid of them. It feels like there's something deep in us that if we went into, we would get lost or might not return. Many times throughout my years as a psychotherapist, I've heard people say, if I let myself down into that mess, I'll never be able to come back. And some of you have had that experience, the sense that something is deep and dark and empty and scary. It's where we keep our demons, so to speak, not in a little literal demons, but that's where we keep the things that we fear the most. That's the shadow. So it's very important that at some point in our evolution, we consciously and intentionally begin to work with the shadow and its energies to clear it out. This is what in the spiritual path is called purification. We work to clear these energies so that they're no longer problematic. They no longer contaminate our sense of ourself, our view of ourself. They no longer influence how we interpret. They no longer influence what we magnetize into our lives, so forth. So this takes some courage to begin with until we develop skills to be able to look on a rather regular basis at all these things that begin to bubble to the surface. Now, the reason that I'm bringing it up here is because what's happening in the world right now is a veritable pressure cooker. Have you noticed? It's a veritable pressure cooker. And when we're in a pressure cooker, things really get brought to the surface. It's one of the purposes of things being really intense, is to help them to come to the surface, right? Now, to the ego, we don't want help bringing them to the surface, right? But to any of us that want to move in the direction of greater consciousness, greater awakeness, greater freedom, greater love, then it's essential that we clean out the shadow of these energies that run so contrary to the higher qualities that we would like to live in and operate from. So when there's a lot of fear in the world, it has a tendency of bringing up all our fear. When there's a lot of anger in the world, it has a tendency of bringing up all our anger. When there's a lot of uncertainty around us, it has the tendency of bringing up uncertainty. When we see violence and hatred, it has a tendency of stimulating those qualities in ourselves, right? And so unless one is living in a cave and not in communication with the world at all, our daily exposure to unrest and unhappiness and despair and sickness and fear and trepidation about the future and financial stress, etc., our exposure to all that will have a definite effect on how we experience our inner life. It will bring that to the surface. It will hook that stuff and bring it up in us. So many of you here tonight understand you can feel in the last 4 or 5 months the intensification of some of these qualities in your own life. Um, Most of the clients I'm working with have some version of this kind of intense arising of this shadow material. Um, and rather than seeing it as something bad that's happening, something that we want to try to get away from, I invite you to see it as something that's necessary and purposeful, both individually and collectively. It's not just an invitation for me individually to work with my stuff. It's certainly that, but it's not just an invitation for me to work with my stuff. It's also an invitation for human beings as a whole, the collective, to work with our shadow material. Every group that you're a part of has its own shadow. Every race, every religious group, everything that you use to identify yourself, whether it's a gender or your skin color or where you were born or what your belief system is or what your political stance is, all of these groups have their own their own karmas. And we have to work with all of that. It has a dramatic effect on how we experience ourselves. So I am promoting that we get really clear, that we learn to turn inward and with courage, bring the light of awareness into the shadow, work skillfully in order to clear these energies. And we get better at it as we practice. All right, so that's a kind of simple introduction to the shadow. Do you have any questions about that? Is there anyone that wants to unmute and just ask me a question about that, that definition of the shadow? Don't be shy.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, please.
I would like to ask about confusion and how that fits into the shadow side, because as I look at some of those childhood things and observe other children, a lot of times you just don't know what's going on. When the rock flies into the room and you investigate and you find out and you can calm yourself, but as a child, there was no one to explain or no one to do the calming.
Exactly.
And how does, and so that becomes part of the shadow side, but also a way that the mind works with confusion. It's just like when things get intense, it's just that confusion takes over. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, you're on the right. That's absolutely right. And confusion is not knowing, and not knowing is quite intolerable for us. Not knowing for most people, including and especially children, will result in great anxiety. Right? Not knowing leaves us feeling quite vulnerable. We don't know when the next rock is coming. We don't know why the rock came through. We don't know when the next one is coming through. And so the confusion leads to anxiety. So what the mind will seek to do is come up with some explanation. And inevitably, a child will look at things in a very like take things personal kind of way. Why is it that Dad was so angry at me and threw the dish on the floor and stormed out? Oh, it must have been something I did. Right? Children interpret things narcissistically. We don't have enough experience. As a 5-year-old, I can't say, wow, Dad, you need to get to AA and get some help for yourself. Right? A 5-year-old's not going to say that. They're going to say, what did I do to cause that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's an effort. The interpretation, though it's false, is an effort to quiet the anxiety. If I can figure this out, I can keep it from happening. Right? So the confusion usually leads to the establishment of an interpretation or of a story that is not true, but will join with all the other kind of ways that I've personalized things and have a detrimental effect on how I feel about myself I'll generalize my experience in the home to believe that all of the world is like that. If I was, if dad finally left and abandoned us as a family, I will have somewhere in my system this belief that abandonment is what I'm to expect in relationships. Right. So these things get stuck in our system. We make beliefs out of them. Those beliefs then profoundly shape how we experience our lives and operate in the world. Does that answer your question about confusion?
Yes.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that children in such settings are completely confused about things.
Right.
And because nobody is helping us, or because we're hearing dad say, "You did this to me, you made me angry," that's confusing too, because I didn't know what I did.
Right.
But these things will become ultimately detrimental, self-deprecating, shame and fear-based stories that then, until we learn how to work with them, will dramatically affect how we view ourselves and operate in the world and in relationships.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Anybody else have a question? I want this to be as clear as possible so that as we work on it, you'll understand why we're working on it. And it will help to motivate you to stay engaged in the process, because at first, learning to work with the shadow is a little scary, a little difficult. And if we have a good motive, it's very helpful. Yeah, Abby, did you want to say something?
Well, I was wondering if the shadow, one of the things you say is anything that is not love, it, I'm losing my question. If the shadow is stuff that is not love.
Yes.
That's the same.
Totally. It's the shadow is full of challenging, difficult, what we would consider negative energies: fear, shame, feelings of lack, repressed feelings of anger, resentment toward oneself, toward others, guilt, so forth. And lots and lots and lots of stories that promote and facilitate and perpetuate those emotional experiences. All of that, of course, the mind creates when it doesn't feel its connection to higher consciousness. If at 5, I am completely and utterly aligned with my soul, and it's the energy and the wisdom and the love of my soul that is running my personality, I'm not going to interpret dad's behavior in a self-deprecating way. I'm going to be able to see, oh, dad is suffering incredibly and is lost in preoccupations with his own karmas, right? But typically 5-year-olds, they don't have that connection. But if we did have that connection, we wouldn't develop our shadow. We would live in the soul. So the shadow isn't wrong, bad, evil. It's a part of our evolutionary journey. It's a part of the evolution of consciousness. Learning to work with our shadow is learning to be responsible for our experience in life. That's one of the main tasks or lessons of a human life, is to learn to work skillfully with one's consciousness to determine one's state of consciousness, rather than feel like a victim to the world and having to just languish with those energies. That's a very, very important lesson for us. So learning to work with our shadow is really important. And it just so happens that we all have one. So, hey, we got something to work with. It's a lab for us to learn to work in. Anyone else have a question?
I think I do.
Please.
I would like to know, this is Kay.
Hi, Kay.
I would like to know, is there a difference between the veil that we learned about in our previous classes and the shadow?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, I would not equate the two. I would say that the shadow is definitely a part of the veil. The veil that Kay is referring to is this kind of veil of forgetting. When consciousness comes into form, there's a forgetting that takes place, and we talk about the veil as what exists that keeps us from perceiving our higher nature, perceiving the spiritual dimension of the universe. So I would definitely say, I'd have to think that through a little more, Kay. I would definitely say that the shadow is a part of the veil, but I wouldn't say that it is the same thing, that those are synonymous terms.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, that's not a very satisfying answer.
But that's good enough for now.
I'll have to think through it a little more.
Okay.
All right, anyone else have a question? So if I can't see you and don't acknowledge you and you want to have a question, just unmute yourself and ask away. Okay, then let's begin our work. So in order to work with the shadow, the very first thing I would encourage you to do, always ask for help, open to grace. We emphasized that last week. Ask for help, open to grace. So you do this in your own way. You do this using words that fit for you and your cosmology. I might use the word God, and that word have a negative connotation for you, so you wouldn't use that word. Totally fine. You may use the word universe. I open to the universe and I ask for help. We set intentions. I'm setting the intention to lean into the shadow with the help of divine grace, to become familiar with the contents of the shadow, and to bring the light of love and grace into the shadow so that everything I find there might be healed, cleared, and released. So you might ask your soul for help. You might ask a spiritual master such as Jesus or Buddha. You might ask an archangel. You might ask a being of light such as Kuan Yin, Mother Mary. You might just pray that the wisdom and light of divine spirit would lead you in this process. You see, anything that attunes you to higher consciousness, these things are not other than you. They are expressions of your own higher consciousness. So we start with that kind of prayer, that kind of intention, that kind of attunement, because there's tremendous help and grace being poured out for us right now. And we connect to it by asking for it, by opening to it, by becoming receptive. And then we begin to just pay attention to those energies that we normally would turn away from. We begin to bring attention to the uncomfortable energies that are in our systems, in our hearts, in our bellies, showing up various physical ways, emotional energies. And again, you can just ask yourself, what are some of the energies that have been causing me some distress throughout this last week? It could be just kind of a nagging sense of an underlying anxiety that seems to be kind of always present, like a low-grade fever, always there. Or it could be something that comes as a result of a traumatic event. Like you may have seen the explosion in Beirut, and lots of people were killed and injured, and that might just kind of leave you in this like very uncomfortable feeling that the world is unsafe and that things out of the blue at any moment, bad things can happen. Be particularly curious about pronouncements that your mind makes about the world. Oh, the world is a terrible, terrible place. The world it's just going to hell in a handbasket. Look at all the terrible things that are happening in the world. And ways in which the mind wants to blame people, groups of people, political parties, the president, just somebody to kind of lash out to, blame. And any part of the mind wanting to do that, then pay close attention to what's driving that. What's driving the blame? What's driving the criticism? Or what's driving the need to get in more control? Maybe some of you experienced that, this feeling of being out of control, and the effort in your own personal life and perhaps family to be more in control. And then see if you can track down under the control to the fear that's driving it. There's, of course, just the anxiety about the future. How is all this going to unfold? What kind of changes will come as a result? Many of us have minds that are very afraid of change. We don't know how things are going to go, what the quality of our life will be when this is all over. For many people today, there are growing tensions in their relationships with the families that they are kind of stuck in this house with. Growing anger or resentment or criticism or frustration, patterns that were more hidden and underground, now right at the surface. Distancing patterns. Right now, all I want you to do is look, just watch. Don't shrink back. Pay attention to what's there. Do your best to keep the body relaxed. And your breath moving. And your heart open. Our tendency when we allow ourselves to feel these energies is to tighten up. Consciousness contracts, is drawn down into the lower chakras, especially the root chakra. And suddenly we're in a sense of fear about safety and survival. Much of the world is operating solely from the root chakra right now. I want you to think that you're watching these energies from an awareness that comes from a higher source, not with your root chakra. Even now, as you're watching these energies, getting in touch with them, notice that the awareness that you're watching with or from, that awareness is in perfect peace. Now, I'm not saying the mind is in perfect peace. The mind might be in quite an agitated state. The awareness, which is actually a quality of the soul, is in perfect peace. See if you can notice this. The awareness that we are watching these painful, difficult, challenging qualities from and with does not share the nature of those qualities, does not share those qualities in itself. For example, as awareness watches anxiety, it is not itself anxious. So be curious about your awareness. Be curious about the experience of watching. This becomes part of the practice where you're watching these energies. Let's just say it's anxiety, and you feel the burn of it in your solar plexus. But you're also noticing the nature of the awareness that's watching. So that technically, awareness is aware of itself watching. And rather than getting lost in the energies, the qualities of anxiety and fear and shame, rather than getting lost in that, you remain more and more identified as the awareness that's watching, the peaceful awareness that's watching the anxiety. So this is why several weeks ago we talked about that practice. Who is it that feels anxious right now? Right? That's a way of disidentifying with that energy. Who is it? It's not me. I am awareness watching the energy. Who is it? What part of me is feeling anxious? And I watch that with the awareness that is already and always at perfect peace. Now, as soon as you're able to identify just a little more, step back and identify a little more as the peaceful awareness, some of the fear about these challenging energies dissipates. Yes, I'm watching anxiety, but anxiety is not what I am. It's an energy. And as I'm watching it, and as I'm identified as peaceful awareness, watching anxiety, typically some of the intensity begins to dissipate. This is an actual emptying out of this energy from the shadow. The intensity of the shadow remains intense, either because we are resisting and repressing, or because we're completely identified with those energies. Now we've got something else going on. We're more and more identified as peaceful and loving awareness, watching with great compassion these energies in the shadow. And I'd like you to think that the energy of awareness is like light, very literally like light. So as you look into the shadow with awareness, from awareness, as awareness, you're shining light into it. The very act of shining the light of awareness into the shadow diminishes the darkness and intensity of the shadow. Now let's get clearer on the nature of this awareness. For a moment, let go of looking at any of the darker energies in the shadow. Let go of looking at anxiety and shame and guilt and fear and so forth. Let go of that. Become more curious about the nature of this awareness that's watching. See if you can let awareness pull back into itself to feel its own nature. The spaciousness and peace. The equanimity. How awareness itself, soul consciousness, we could say, is always free and always light. And there's never anything that happens at the personality level that diminishes the light of the soul, because its light comes from divine spirit. Its light is an expression of the light of spirit. Now, let's see if we can enhance that. I'd like you to bring your attention now up to the crown of your head. I'd like you to envision the crown chakra like a closed lotus bud. Now, if you're not familiar with what a lotus bud looks like, use a rosebud. It doesn't matter. Just classically, it's visualized as a lotus bud with 1,000 petals. So your attention now is at the crown. You're visualizing a closed lotus bud. And now with your intention, let that lotus bud open. The petals stretch up and fall back, all 1,000 pure white petals. While holding the intention for the crown chakra to open wide. And the crown chakra opens to the highest levels of spiritual consciousness, the highest dimensions of spirit, which are dimensions of pure light. So as you open now to these dimensions, imagine that from these incredibly high levels of consciousness, light pours down. Now, this is very unfamiliar to the ego. And so don't worry if this is relatively new to you and you're not seeing or feeling, just visualize it. Let your intuitive awareness stretch up above the head and sense that there is this profound, brilliant, very refined light shining down into the crown of the head and into your system, down through the chakric system, into your body. Now this is not like turning on a light bulb where there are photons streaming through the room. This is living light. This is the light of consciousness, the light of supreme consciousness or divine consciousness. This is the descending light of spirit. So it is the light of intelligence and love, infinite wisdom, inspiration, compassion, grace, bliss, unspeakable power. And just make yourself receptive to the inflow of this light. And think now that you can direct the flow of this light by consciously choosing where you point your awareness. Wherever you turn the eyes of awareness, so to speak, this light is going to flow through that gaze. The light that pours through the light of awareness is divine in origin. So as this light pours in, think that you have the capacity, because this is the nature of the soul, to direct the power, the brilliance, the grace, the healing power, the awakening power of this light. You have the power to direct that by consciously and intentionally choosing where you're going to point your awareness. So I invite you to consciously and intentionally point your awareness into your shadow. And invite the unspeakable love and wisdom and power of the highest divine consciousness to pour through the channel of your awareness into your shadow. So that now it is divine love, divine consciousness that's touching your anxiety. It is Buddha nature. It is Christ consciousness that is shining through your awareness, healing, diminishing, dissipating all repressed energies. And you have to be willing, in order to connect to the energies with awareness, you have to be willing to feel them. You can't do this from afar or like, step out of yourself and say, yeah, go for it, light, go clean that area up. No, you have to be willing to feel the anxiety and allow the light from above to penetrate and infuse it. Now, as in any meditation, when your mind wanders off, that's totally fine. Just bring it back. You may notice that there's some resistance to the practice, that some parts of you are going, whoa, this is weird, this is intense, this is new. Now, let's move on to the second part of the meditation. And to begin this second part, if you choose to, and again, these things are always, always your choice. If you choose to, as we did last week, open yourself and invite the great masters, the great beings of light, the ascended masters, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all the liberated saints and sages of all religions, to shine their light into your heart, to add to the light that you are now working with, to blend their light with yours. What an unspeakable privilege we have to make that request. And feel or see that energy empower and intensify the light in your heart. And we need this because of what we're about to do. We're about to do something very transpersonal, something that's much, much bigger than what we could do from an ego perspective. So we need this help from higher consciousness. What I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to think that there are millions of people on the planet right now who are struggling with some of these same energies. I'll just keep using the word anxiety, but it could be anything. It could be grief, it could be overwhelm, it could be guilt, it could be, who knows, sadness. But I'll just use the word anxiety and you replace that with anything that you're working with. Think that right now, there are millions of people on the planet who are struggling with the same kind of anxiety that you feel in your own system. Millions of people struggling with anxiety. The vast majority of them have no idea how to work with them. They've never heard about the light of God. They have no clue how to turn within. They have no sense of connection to their own soul. Now let your experience of anxiety, or again, anything you're working with, become a bridge that connects you to these people, these millions of people who are struggling with that same energy. And let it open your heart and feel the compassion that is there for these millions of people who are suffering and struggling with the same energies that you have been working with here tonight. Let yourself just feel some sense of connection to them. Now, you're directing your awareness to these people, connecting best you can with these millions of people struggling with these same energies. You're directing your awareness to them. And remember, your awareness becomes the channel of this divine light. So now let the light, this descending light of spirit that is pouring down from above, channel through your awareness to all of those millions of people. You can just visualize this as light pouring out of your heart into the world. There is no limitation here. There would be if the ego was trying this, but there is not for your soul. So just have the intention that the light pour out through your heart to all the people struggling with the same kind of energies that you've been working with here tonight. Feel what it's like for the light just to pour through you on behalf of others. Ask for help in getting out of your own way. Ask the light to clear out the blockages in your heart that may in some way limit or inhibit the flow of light. Ask that your heart and your awareness be purified to become a pure channel of the light of spirit on behalf of others. Now, as the light is coursing through you in this way, then just offer this Bodhisattva prayer. I will say it out loud, and then you repeat it just quietly inside of yourself. The Bodhisattva prayer is, may all beings be happy and free. May all beings be safe and well. May all beings awaken to their true nature. May all beings live together in peace and harmony. Now let's do it again. Really feel yourself to be extended out in some kind of connection to the people around the world who are experiencing some of the same qualities as you have found in yourself tonight. Really let yourself, your heart feel for them, compassion for them. And let that compassion then express in these words. May all beings be happy and free. May all beings be safe and well. May all beings awaken to their true nature. May all beings live together in peace and harmony. Settle back into and just rest in your own heart center. Feel it or visualize it as being brilliant with light. Some part of that light continues to radiate into the shadow, whether or not you feel any connection to it right now. You've been able to let a lot go. There's still more, of course. So just the sense that some of that light is shining into the shadow. But just rest in the inherent peace, tranquility, equanimity, spaciousness of your light-filled heart. And if you choose to, set an intention to do a little of this work every day. It doesn't have to be a long setting like this one, but just a little every day, noticing what you're feeling. And if it's not love and light and bliss, then do a little work with it. Bring the light of awareness to it. Call down the descending light of spirit. Just a little every day. Let the contents of the shadow dissipate and dissolve back into light. All right, take a nice deep breath. Feel the way the body is being supported by the chair, the couch. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel your root chakra connected to the earth. And then when you're ready, open your eyes and let the body move a little.